Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Middle East Report. In this programme will be aired a pre-recorded interview that I did with the Deputy Israeli Foreign Minister, Danny Ayalon. In the interview with Danny Ayalon, we discussed what are the opportunities and the challenges facing Israel in 2012. We also discussed the threat posed to Israel by Iran. And also we looked at what are the prospects for the Middle East and the chance for peace this year. We also discussed the status of Jerusalem and the continued importance of the Jewish-Israel-Christian relationship. To discuss these very critical issues, I'm joined today by Alex Ryvchin, who is a spokesman for the Zionist Federation and also represents the Jewish thinker. Alex, great to have you on the programme again. Alex, we're going to go to very shortly a pre-recorded interview I did with the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister, Danny Ayalon, talking about the importance of the historic relationship between Christians and Israel and the Jewish state, and the importance of this, as well as looking at Iran, the peace process and British-Israeli relations as well. What, in your opinion, is it so vital that the Israelis have spokesmen of Danny Ayalon's nature to talk in front of the media and to give interviews?
I think it's very, very important. We see today an age of great misinformation. Israel being attacked on many fronts. It's no longer just a war of armed conflict or terrorism. It's a war fought over the airwaves, on TV, on the internet. So to have people like Danny Ayalon who are capable of articulating the case for Israel so well and have such a very pragmatic approach to the key issues, I think it's very, very important. And what the Deputy Foreign Minister has done, I think, particularly well, has been to use social networking sites, YouTube, to connect with people at a real sort of grassroots level. I think Barack Obama was probably the first to make use of that medium to such an extent, but that was in the context of trying to get elected, whereas the Deputy Foreign Minister has done it in order to sort of fulfill his duties as a spokesman for Israel. And he's managed to articulate a lot of the key issues, the status of the West Bank, the peace process, the refugees, that sort of thing. So to have people of Danny Ayalon's caliber is absolutely vital to ensuring that the perpetuation of lies and misinformation with regards to Israel is curtailed.
And what's also interesting is that Danny Ayalon also, he represents a long list of very articulate Israeli spokesmen. We had, from the early days, Abba Eban, Israel's first foreign minister and also Israel's ambassador to the United Nations during the State of Israel, right up until the 1967 Six-Day War crisis. A very, very elegant, a very powerful spokesman for Israel. The current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is a fantastic communicator, which is really what Israel needs, is people that can speak up on her behalf to communicate Israel's message of peace to the world.
It's very true. We're seeing this increasing barrage of misinformation and attacks on Israel's very right to exist, and we're seeing it expressed at all levels. At university campuses, in the mainstream media, at the United Nations. So it's absolutely vital that Israel has great orators, people of the Prime Minister's and Danny Ayalon's caliber, which can very well articulate the case for Israel.
And this is something that the Israelis have just really caught onto, is the fact they really need to improve their public relations, really need to be able to improve their spokesman, and also to understand that we're now living in a 24/7 media news information age, where it's vital to get that information out quickly, fast, and with accuracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Palestinian lobby has been very active for a number of years now in using social media and social networking to advance their position. to perpetuate a great degree of lies and misinformation about Israel and the nature of the conflict. And Israel is the home of some great advancements in IT, so I think it's high time that they started really embracing that movement themselves, and ensuring that at all levels that people are able to hear the truth and hear a different side to what they're used to hearing.
I mean, one thing's always amazed me, here we are in 2012, that Israel doesn't have her own international news station, really. Essentially so that Israel can tell her narrative, so that Israel can tell her story to the world, instead of relying upon others to tell her narrative, such as the BBC, Sky, ITN, CNN, for example. Isn't it important that Israel has her own voice, to be a player, to be able to communicate the story that she wants to communicate, instead of relying on others to do so?
I believe so. I think Israel has always had a view that the truth will come out. A profound belief in that by being in the right, by doing the right things, that the world will ultimately catch on and see the conflict as it is and not as it's often portrayed. But unfortunately, people believe what they're told. And you see the BBC, which is cast as being a mainstream, sort of centrist news entity, spread misinformation about things like the occupation or the right of return for Palestinian refugees, these sorts of issues. And it's not enough that Israel relies on and hopes that the truth will ultimately come out and then people will see it. It needs to be very aggressive and very active in advocating it, because certainly the enemies of Israel are very determined in what they do.
And isn't one of the major problems with news, and this is why I'm so privileged to have the Middle East report, is that news is no longer placed in context. So just say there's a bit of violence between the Israelis and the Palestinians, you have the whole world media focus on this one incident that's happened, and the trouble is that news then is not placed in context, also not given historical context. What are the factors that led up to this? Why has this happened? And why is this happening now? You just said, this is the reporting, and much of the time it's editorializing to make Israel look like she's the aggressor and she's the one at fault.
It's very true. The mainstream media, they have a certain angle which they seek to play up at every opportunity. So anytime there is a Palestinian death, whether it be a militant or civilian, in the vast majority of cases it is a militant, it is a terrorist. But the BBC and mainstream media in general will always focus on the death of a Palestinian rather than what brought about that set of circumstances. The fact that there's relentless rocket barrages coming from Gaza, that doesn't make the news here. It doesn't really make the news anywhere outside of Israel anymore. And so, as you said, when we hear about a Palestinian death, people just accept that this is an act of Israeli aggression, but they don't understand the context. They don't understand the fact of Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, the uprooting of Jewish life, of ancient Jewish communities there, and the handing over of that territory to Palestinian control. And that what that resulted in was not, a vibrant Singapore, which could have emerged, but a large training camp for terrorists with relentless rocket attacks on Israeli communities in the south. But people don't understand that context. They don't have that context. All they hear over and over again is occupation, 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 settlements, pre-67 borders, and that really does lead to this very negative public perception of Israel, and that's something which Israel has to try and overcome.
But isn't also one of the problems that Israel has is she doesn't really have a single message. You have the Prime Minister's office saying one thing, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs saying another cabinet minister saying something else. So you don't have a coordinated message and a coordinated strategy. So it can end up being very confusing, the situation if something breaks out. And then you've got the bureaucracy of everything going through the IDF spokesman's unit in order to get passed to given to journalists.
I think in recent years, Israeli PR has become perhaps more savvy and more able to stick to a single point. I think we saw this for the first time around the time of Operation Cast Lead, where you had a very unified Israeli position on the events which led up to that operation, Israeli motivation, for that operation. So I think there's been a shift. I think Israel now is performing a lot better on the PR stage, but there's a very grave risk that people have already made up their minds, and once people have decided that the occupation is at fault, that the Palestinians are the weaker party, that they're under the rule of a great colonial power of some sort, once those sorts of false conclusions are drawn by people, it becomes very, very difficult for Israel to change that. But hopefully with enough information coming out, with the truth coming out, with the involvement of people like the Deputy Foreign Minister getting involved on YouTube, slowly, hopefully, the message will get through, the truth will get through to people.
We now have the interview that I did previously with Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Ayalon. Welcome to a special edition of the Middle East Report. It's a great honour and a great privilege to be joined today by Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Ayalon. Danny, hello and welcome to the Middle East Report.
Good to be here with you, Simon. Thank you.
And it's a wonderful honour and a privilege on behalf of Revelation TV to have an interview with yourself. Can you tell our viewers how you got involved in Israeli diplomacy and what are the challenges being Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister?
Well, the challenges are numerous, especially to bring out our word to the world. We have been bashed very unfairly for so long, and I thought it's time to just put the record straight so people understand who we are, what we are, why are we there in the Holy Land. And in this respect, I had the pleasure of accompanying former Prime Minister Sharon, and he met the Pope in the Vatican back in the early 90s, and they were talking about religion, interfaith, Judeo-Christian heritage, of course. I vividly remember how Mr. Sharon at the time told the Pope that pilgrimage or visiting the Holy Land, Israel, you do not need a tour guide. All you need is the Bible as a tour guide. And the Pope at the time told him that there is a big difference between Terra Santa and Terra Promissa. He said, Terra Santa, this land is very holy and sacred to Jews, Christians, I guess Muslims, but has been promised, Terra Promissa, only to the Jews. So you were there also for us. This was very emotional. I also feel that we are there by the ordain of God, and we are there for a reason. And I'm very proud of our Judeo-Christian heritage. And I realize that today, in this day and age of instant messaging and IT and technological advance, it is very important not to lose sides with the message. We cannot lose sight with the message that we are there in our own homeland. We should not be apologetic for being who we are and for what we do. And in many ways we believe that we are there in the trenches for all of the Judeo-Christian world.
And how important is it, the evangelical support for Israel and the Jewish people at this crucial period of world history?
Oh, this is very tremendous. First of all, Christian support strengthened our faith and our stamina, and we're very privileged to have this friendship, this alliance, this support. As my Christian friends tell me, you are there also for us. If God forbid your security or well-being is compromised, all of our standing in the world and security everywhere we are is compromised. So this support that we get from Christians really strengthens us, really gives us much more power and motivation to be there for the glory of our God.
I say amen to that. And Danny, what are the challenges facing Israel in 2012?
I would say the main challenge is this political attack from the Palestinians and their allies, unfortunately, on Israel, to try and delegitimize Israel, to try to ostracize Israel, to make it a pariah state. And since they have not succeeded in their military campaign, nor in their economic boycott against us, not even in terrorism against us, as we always prevailed, they turn now to a field which seemingly they have some kind of an advantage, which is the political warfare and legal warfare, by using the automatic majority that they do have in the United Nations and in the international organizations. We have to remember that the Arab League countries count 22 states. If you add the Muslim countries, the Organization of Islamic Countries is already 57 countries. There are many not allied or non-allied or developing countries, which also, because of oil pressure and other things, pressure are siding with the Palestinians. So they use all this force against one tiny Israel to keep slamming it, and a barrage of lies about us. And this is now the challenge, this political and legal warfare, which has to be fought. It has to be fought on the airwaves. It has to be fought in the cyberspace. It has to be fought in the printed media. It has to be fought in the campuses, with the younger generation. We are determined to do it, although we are outnumbered, although it's an uphill battle. The truth will prevail, the truth will shine, the truth will come out. And again, this friendship that we have from the Christians is just invaluable.
Why is it that, here we are in 2012, that the Jewish state's been established since 1948? Re-established, exactly. And why is it that Israel is the only state whose legitimacy as a very state or a very nation is questioned by the world? And we have nations, new nations like last year's Southern Sudan. I think it's the latest addition to the family of nations. So why is it that Israel is treated differently from the rest of the world?
This is because the conflict that we have, namely with the Palestinians, is not a conflict about territory. Had it been a territorial conflict, it would have been solved long ago, as there were far-reaching generous offers by various Israeli governments to the Palestinians. Unfortunately, they and also very negative, fanatic Islamist forces in the Middle East and also in other areas do not want to see a non-Muslim country in the Middle East, which is quite disappointing and quite dangerous, because there is this strain of Islam which does not believe in coexistence, not in tolerance. They do not respect minorities, nor do they respect somebody who's different than them. So what they do to support their aggressiveness is twisting and distorting history by negating everything that the Bible tells us, by negating everything that history tells us, which is also concretely proven by all the archaeological artifacts that we find in Jerusalem, in the city of David, in the Moriah and the Zion Mountains, in the Galilee, everywhere else. So it's a battle. It's a battle, maybe even a battle of between civilizations. But we have to understand, we must stand for our rights, because if the extreme Islamists will have their way in the Middle East, then the entire globe will be prey at their feet.
I mean, we saw last year in terms of the peace process, we had the Palestinian Declaration of Independence of the United Nations. How did the world not condemn the Palestinians? Primarily because it was a government of national unity between Fatah and Hamas. As we know that in the Covenant Charter on Hamas, they call for the destruction of Israel, but also the genocide of the Jewish people. How do they have international legitimacy, and why should Israel be pressured to concede territory when the region is so volatile and so dangerous that a peace could be here today but gone tomorrow?
Unfortunately, there is a lot of cynicism, I would say hypocrisy, on the international scene. And again, it has to do with these numbers of Islamic countries and those non-aligned or developing countries which very much are dependent upon Arab or Islamic oil. So if you look at today at the composition of the United Nations, out of 193 member states, more than half are not democratic and are under pressure by the Arabs or by some extreme Muslims. And this is the reason why they can do whatever they want, actually turning the entire international community, especially the UN, into a rubber stamp to their own vagaries and their own will. I think this is dangerous. I think this is a discredit to the international community and the United Nations. But we have to, of course, stand our ground. And so long as we have great friends and allies in the Western societies, as long as we have our greatest support from our Christian friends, we will prevail and not only survive, but will thrive.
You will. We believe that very strongly. I want to talk to you now about the most pressing foreign policy issue of our generation, and that's Iran. As we know from the IAEA report that Iran is very close to developing nuclear weapons. Not only that, they are the world's leading sponsor of international terrorism. Has the war already started with Iran, as we've seen the assassination of one of their scientists? The second, 4 scientists have been killed now in 4 years. We've seen an explosion at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's main missile base last year. And has that war already started? Also the Cynex computer virus, which disabled their nuclear weapons. Why is it so imperative that the Western world defeat Iran's nuclear weapons program?
It is very imperative because our survival and future is concerned, and that relates to the entire international community, because the marriage or the potential marriage of nuclear capabilities with fanaticism, with a regime which is bent on destruction of anybody which is not a radical Muslim as they are, like the Ayatollahs of Iran, of course we understand the implications. We're talking about a regime which has threatened already to annihilate other countries, Israel, for example, and by having these capabilities, they may be even further more aggressive in terms of terrorism, in terms of agitation, in terms of really negative political influence throughout the Middle East, but also far beyond the Middle East, whether in Latin America or in Africa. Their fingerprints are very, very evident all across the universe in a very adverse way. Also, I think from an sheer economic point of view, a nuclear Iran will be able to control oil flow and oil prices, which could really grind the entire economy of the world into a halt. Iran, the Ayatollahs of Iran, have global ambitions to make the world Islamic as they are. They say it, they act like it. This is why we certainly, the civilized world, cannot tolerate a nuclear Iran.
I mean, you serve at the highest level of international diplomacy. Is there the political will from the United States, from the European Union, from Britain to deal with this Iranian threat? Because surely if Iran gets nuclear weapons, they'll preserve their state, support groups like Hezbollah, even Al-Qaeda, to carry out more audacious and daring attacks, and lead to a proliferation of nuclear weapons in the region. Surely President Obama should realize that this is the most pressing, most dangerous issue on his table today.
Yes, and I observe a full understanding of that in the United States, here in Great Britain, in most civilized, decent countries in the world. By the way, we also observe an accelerating pace of the Iranian military program, their nuclear program, because they see as the nuclear program not as a end goal, but as means to the end which I previously described, with the hegemony of the Middle East and beyond. By the way, we also note an accelerated pace of these illegal nuclear activities of Iran recently, precisely because they are afraid to lose major allies in the region like Syria and the Assad's regime, and in their mind nuclear capability is their only immunity or their only insurance policy that they can continue with their domination aspirations and ambitions.
Yeah. What was your reaction to the Arab Spring? I mean, the Arab Spring, I think, emerged last year with a great sense of hope that the Arab world would embrace democracy, freedom and liberty. But if we take Egypt, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamist parties have won 70% of the seats in the parliamentary elections, and they're looking to take power off the military junta in Egypt. Is there not a great danger now that Israel's historic peace treaty with Egypt is coming to an end?
Well, I hope not. Notwithstanding some dangerous rhetorics coming out of Egypt, but not in the formal, not in the official way, I would say that any responsible government in Egypt, whether now or in the future, that would address the challenges for Egypt and for the region will keep the peace with Israel as a high priority. It's important not only for Israel, but also for Egypt and for the region as well. So I believe that the peace treaty will not be in danger.
And talking about other issues relating to the peace process, you're here in Britain, you would have had high-level ministerial talks while you're here. What is the extent of the relationship between Britain and the State of Israel today?
Well, bilateral relations are exceptional. We are very compatible in terms of our economy, our level of scientific achievement, in terms of our universal values sharing, and also in terms of our interests. There are, unfortunately, some arguments or some disputes over political matters, but I believe these are more disagreements between friends, and we must agree to disagree, and I think it's very important for both countries and peoples not to let these great bilateral relations be contaminated by issues which are outside of the relations, like the Palestinian conflict. And of course we respect the British government's view, which may be different than our views, but we must, again, as friends, agree to disagree, and I believe at the end of the day, once we see a different approach from the Palestinians, things will also be going much smoothly in this area as well. But certainly we should not let the Palestinians or anybody else have a veto power over the very good and important relations between two friends and allies like the United Kingdom and Israel.
Definitely. Can I talk to you about Christians? How come Christians who have a real heart and a passion for Israel, because I know that so many of our viewers do, stand with Israel and the Jewish people today?
Well, I think that we realize today who our real friends are, who believe in the same things that we do, who really care for us, and who really care for our faith and for our values and, of course, well-being. And today, when there is a threat to all of us, we should really keep together and work together. And I see it on a daily basis. We receive millions of tourists from all over the world. Mostly they are Christian tourists, and we welcome them very much. It is really very gratifying to see them walking in the land and in the land of Jesus and following his footsteps, whether it's in the Galilee or in Jerusalem. And so we welcome them, and we will continue to work together for really towards a better world for all of us.
And as a Jew, Danny, an observant Jew, what does Jerusalem symbolise and mean to you as a fantastic eternal city of God?
Well, Jerusalem makes us whole. We have to remember that Jerusalem was the reason that we kept as a people in 2,000 years of exile. It was this prayer next year in Jerusalem that kept our faith, that kept us, kept our identity. So it is certainly incumbent upon us now to, I would say, to not only pay respect, but as Jerusalem guarded us as a people, we must now guard Jerusalem. We have to remember that Jerusalem has never been under any sovereign nation but Israel, starting with King David and King Solomon and later Jewish rulers. All other occupiers of Jerusalem were just as such, were occupiers, whether it's the Romans or Greeks or other pagan, and certainly, of course, the Ottomans and the Ottoman Empire or other Muslim rulers. So Jerusalem for us is the city of God. Jerusalem for us is where we started as a nation. Jerusalem for us is a sacred place which symbolizes the holiness of our faith and closeness to God.
And do you have a message for our viewers?
Absolutely. We very much appreciate and respect our brothers and sisters, the Christians of the world. We invite you to come and visit your heritage. Judeo-Christian heritage is universal to us all. And once you will come and see what we have done in this once desolate place, which was really ravaged by many occupiers, where you see where it is now, I think you will be proud, and you will feel also closeness to God right there in the Holy Land.
Daniel, I just want to say it's been a pleasure interviewing you today, and I know as a channel, and I know that with our viewers as well, that we stand with Israel, we stand with the Jewish people, and I want to thank you for coming onto this programme, and it's a real privilege for us to give Israel and the Jewish people a voice, and we want to say that we want to stand with you, and we want to fight with you. It doesn't matter how difficult life becomes, how difficult the international situation is there. We want to reassure you that our friendship is solid, it's pure, it's genuine, and we're standing with you. So thank you for this interview today.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it because we understand that this friendship comes from the most, the deepest place and the most sacred place, and it's not dependent upon any other issues. It's whole, it's true, it's genuine, and it is received just as much.
This concludes a very special interview here today with Ayalon, the Deputy Israeli Foreign Minister. That was an interview that I did previously with Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister Ayalon. Alex, we saw there the interview with the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister, Ayalon, and he raised some very, very important issues. One thing he really talked about was the importance of the Jewish-Christian relationship and Christian support for Israel. Is it that the situation around the world, Israel's isolation, the delegitimization of Israel, that the Israeli government and Israeli people are beginning to realise what such strong support they get from the Christian community?
Yeah, I think Israel is acutely aware of the importance of their Christian friends and Christian cooperation to the survival of Israel, and to also the spreading of truth, of a different message to what people tend to hear in the mainstream media. Israel is under attack, and it needs its help, it needs its allies, it needs its friends, and certainly the Christians, because of that deeply rooted tradition, because of that common morality with the Jewish people, that Judeo-Christian heritage, a belief in the Torah. These are the sorts of things which bind us together. And at a time when Israel, as you said, is facing this increasing isolation and delegitimization, I think the people of Israel understand how vital the Christian community is to it.
And in terms of our shared Judeo-Christian heritage, it's been the anchorage. It's the anchorage in society that has really kept our morality. It's given us an identity. And it's given us, our society, Western society, a moral platform that's excelled more than anywhere else in the world. But I just want to draw your thoughts to one point. I have a very close friend and mentor who worked in the Pentagon, a Jewish Orthodox guy. Worked very, very high up in the Pentagon, and I met him in about '99. He sat with me, and he said something very profound. And he said that the Jewish people represent the canary that used to go down the mine shafts, that a couple of hundred years ago, even probably less than that, 70 years ago, the miners would take the canary in a cage down into the mines. And if there were any dangerous gases, the canary would die, and it would act as a warning signal for the rest of the miners to get out because there were dangerous gases. He said that the Jewish people are that canary, that once the Jewish people start to suffer, and as we witness a rise of anti-Semitism in the world, and the Jewish people are again persecuted, then this provides a warning to the rest of the world that what started with the Jews doesn't finish with the Jews.
I think that's very true. I think it's a very profound analogy. A society has always been marked in a way by how it treats its Jews, because the Jews have always occupied a position in the diaspora as being, historically, as being a disadvantaged people, an ill-treated people, and a persecuted minority. And inevitably, when the persecution would start with the Jews as a very easy target and a classic scapegoat, it would infect the rest of society and it would spread to other groups. So I think it's very true. And what we're seeing now is not only a rise of anti-Semitism, but accompanying that, we're seeing a broader erosion of the Judeo-Christian tradition. We're seeing Christian communities at threat. You're seeing the Coptic Church undermined and communities there being attacked, churches set alight in Egypt. We're seeing similar events in Nigeria. So there's definitely an implication of growing anti-Semitism which spreads beyond just the Jewish people. It's an indictment on society in general. It shows the way in which society is going. So I think it's something which must be combated by all of society. It's not merely a Jewish problem.
Yeah, and having done some programs to remember the Shoah, the Holocaust, and had the privilege of interviewing a fantastic Jewish survivor called Jack Kagan this year at the Imperial War Museum, what becomes very, very prevalent is this whole concept that the world, the United Nations then after it was established, the international community vowed never, never, never again. And yet in 2012 we have Hamas who have declared in their charter, not only do they call for the destruction of the State of Israel, but call for genocide against the Jewish people. We have Hezbollah who oppose with 40,000 rockets poised at Tel Aviv and Israeli cities. And the head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, calling for the destruction of the State of Israel. We see the Iranian president, Ahmadinejad, constantly repeating his calls to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth, which is essentially incitement to genocide. Has the world learned nothing from the horrors of what the Nazis did in wiping out 6 million Jews out of possible 8 million Jews across the whole continent of Europe?
I think it was Aldous Huxley, the great British novelist, who said that one of the greatest lessons of history is that we don't learn the lessons of history. And it's true, it's remarkable that we find ourselves such a short time after the Holocaust in a position where people can brazenly threaten the survival of the Jewish state and the survival of its people. It's a remarkable set of events that we've let it get to this point. It's very easy after the Holocaust to say never again, but it takes genuine courage to stand up, to identify a new threat and to challenge it. And the world, in appeasing Iran, in allowing their nuclear program to get to the state where it is now, I think it's shameful, nothing short of it. I mean, it's been since at least 2002 that Israel has been telling the world of Iran's nuclear ambitions. Since at least 2004, Iran has done very little to deny its nuclear program. And yet we've let it get to this point. The international community has let it happen, and only now are we seeing meaningful sanctions introduced and steps implemented to stop Iran. So to allow so short after the Holocaust, to allow the Jewish people and the Jewish state to be threatened in the way that it is, I think it's a massive indictment on the international community.
But one thing it's very interesting when it comes down to Israel's foreign policy formation. You had Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, and the whole concept of his foreign policy was the Iron Wall. That we need to say that we're strong. We need to say that, firstly, as a Jewish nation, we have to protect ourselves. We can't rely upon the international community to protect ourselves. And so, therefore, if we're in trouble, then we'll face that trouble alone. But life's become a lot more complicated. We talked in the beginning of the interview about the media and the media spotlight and focus. And yet it seems as if the drums for war are starting in the Middle East, particularly with Iran, as Iran already this year has threatened to close the Straits of Hormuz, which in itself is a declaration of war, their continued sponsorship of international terrorism and their pursuit of nuclear weapons. Also, it's also noted this is just not an Israel problem. The Arab world are very, very concerned and alarmed about Iran's within the region. Could we see Arab-Israeli alliance working together against the Iranian nuclear threat?
I hope so, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have that, because as you said, the threat to Israel, or the broader threats of a nuclear Iran are not confined to Israel. It's a global issue. And we're seeing this splintering in Persian-Arab relations, which have never been that good, to be honest. But we're seeing this schism develop in the region between the Sunni kingdom of Saudi Arabia and its allies in the Gulf on the one hand, and Iran with its allies Hezbollah, Hamas and Syria on the other. And how that's going to play out, no one really knows. But what we do know is that the implications of a nuclear Iran on that emerging Cold War and on the region in general and the world in general are so grave and so severe that they can't be tolerated. As you said, just recently, Iran has threatened to blockade the Straits of Hormuz, which would have massive consequences on the flow of the most important strategic resource in the world. You have Iran calling for the destruction of Israel. You have Iran using its proxies, Syria, Hezbollah and Hamas, to incite war, to draw the region into a regional war. So how things will develop, nobody knows. But one thing which we do know for sure is that we cannot allow this belligerent, murderous regime to acquire the deadliest weapon known to man. That is just a catastrophe which cannot be allowed to happen.
And when we saw in the interview earlier, I was interviewing Danny Ayalon. He was talking about the threat posed to Israel of the Camp David Accords, the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt that has lasted since 1979. And the fact is now that the Muslim Brotherhood and their Islamist parties look to have actually secured 70% of the seats in the new Egyptian parliament. And now they're trying to wrestle power away from the military junta in order to have full power in Egypt. Isn't there a great danger that what we're seeing really is the Islamization of the Arab world and the collapse of regimes, as we saw in Egypt, with possibly the collapse of the Jordanian government, the Hashemites, leading to really a renaissance of Islamic extremism in the Middle East, that Israel's going to be strategically encircled?
Yeah, what we're seeing is very troubling, and Israel, like the rest of the world, watches on with great anticipation to see what happens. You've seen the fall of these dictatorships, which have been there for generations, and the question is, what will emerge in its place? Now, the Arab Spring and events in Egypt and throughout North Africa and the Middle East, these aren't driven by any sort of relationship with Israel. They have no connection with Israel. It's about a basic yearning for freedom, for the sorts of rights that you and I take for granted here. And these people are entitled to it. People have the right to choose who governs them.
But isn't there a great danger here that so many, particularly if I take Egypt, for example, and you had millions demonstrating on the streets of Cairo. They gathered at Tahrir Square to defy the military, to defy President Mubarak because they wanted freedom. And now because the Islamist parties are the ones that are most organised and most effective, they're the ones that are enhancing what essentially started off as a movement to create democracy and freedom and economic empowerment on the individual themselves is being taken away from them. And instead what they've gotten is the extreme Islamist government of the nature of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what's happening. You have the Arab Spring motivated by a desire for openness, to join the international community, to enjoy freedoms that the rest of the world has, It's no coincidence that social networking, which is the profound means of connection today, was so vital to the Arab Spring. But what you're seeing in these elections is people choosing these repressive new regimes, which will effectively take them back to the 8th century. And if they allow themselves to be governed by Islamists, by Salafists, then ultimately what will happen is there will be a withdrawal of foreign aid, foreign investment, tourism, and everything which they sought to achieve through the Arab Spring would have come to naught.
Yeah. And then you probably got the prospects of new revolutions in the future.
Yeah.
But more oppressive. But also what's very, very troubling is the end of Israel's peace treaty with Egypt that's lasted since 1979, that Israel would have to worry about her southern border, would have to worry about her border with Gaza, have to worry about her northern border with Hezbollah, and also with the Palestinians themselves. And that Israel's being pressurized by the international community to make huge concessions for peace, to establish a Palestinian state. But if Israel signs an agreement today with the Palestinian President Abbas, who's to say that he's not overthrown by Hamas in a couple of months? And then right on Israel's border, you have a Hamas terrorist entity that decides to fire Katyusha rockets all over Israel.
Yeah. I mean, Israel has been in support of the creation of a Palestinian state since the creation of Israel and before. Israel accepted partition plans in 1937 following the Peel Commission. It accepted UN partition in 1947. It has always genuinely embraced and through its actions shown an acceptance of the idea of a two-state solution, 2 states for 2 peoples. The problem is that the Palestinians have steadfastly refused to reciprocate that acceptance. There is still a refusal to accept that Israel is the ancestral and national home of the Jewish people and will always remain that way. We've seen since Haj Amin al-Husseini through to Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas now, we've seen one thing said in English to appease the international community, and we've seen an entirely different thing said in Arabic to their own people. We see a different thing preached in mosques, taught in schools, on their television. We're seeing this indoctrination of the next generation. They're being told that they must treat Haifa in the same way that they would treat Hebron, Beit Hanun to be treated in the same way as Ashkelon, that there is no difference between Israel and the Palestinian territories. It's all Palestinian land to be liberated. And this is the barrier to peace. This is why we have no peace. And until there's a genuine acceptance that Israel is once again the homeland of the Jewish people and will remain forevermore the homeland of the Jewish people, there can be no peace.
So we're really saying here, really, that the whole Middle East peace process is just nothing but a Trojan horse. That the Palestinian leadership, whether it's Fatah or whether it's Hamas, want to see the destruction of Israel. In terms of Islamic law, is considered Waqf, holy Islamic territory, and that every inch of that land will be fought. So if Israel then concedes and says, you know what, unilaterally we're going to withdraw from Judea-Samaria or the West Bank, allow the creation of a Palestinian state, it would still be at war. But the international community, the British Foreign Office, the British government, the European Union, the Americans believe that if the Palestinians have their own state, that's the end of the conflict. But surely this will be only the start of the conflict.
Well, if unilateral disengagement were to reap the sorts of results that the world is expecting, then surely Israel's withdrawal from Gaza would have met with some sort of peace there, rather than endless barrages of rocket attacks. What we're seeing is we've seen some perhaps recession in violence from the Palestinians. We've seen a decline in terrorism, largely through efforts of security and counterintelligence by the Israelis. But that has suggested to the world that the Palestinians are somehow ready for statehood, that they're willing to embrace diplomacy as opposed to terror. In fact, it's nothing of the sort. The Palestinians have merely broadened their war against Israel. It's no longer just armed conflict and terrorism. It's now lawfare. It's now cyber attacks. It's now calls for boycotts, sanctions, these sorts of things. It's now an attempt to flood Israel with the descendants of Palestinian refugees in order to turn Israel into a majority Palestinian state. So we're seeing at the very core this steadfast refusal by the Palestinians to accept Israel's right to exist, and not merely right to exist, but right to exist as the homeland of the Jewish people. That is what's at the core. And people should not be fooled by, grand speeches before the United Nations General Assembly or steps like that. There is still a concerted effort by the Palestinians to displace Israel and replace it with an Arab state.
I think we've got about 2 minutes left of the programme, Alex, but why is the world so blind to this? Why are they so blind to the realities that a Palestinian state, as it currently stands, will not bring peace with Israel and the Palestinians, but will actually further inflame the conflict?
I think there's such a strong degree of misinformation that people, you can't blame the man on the street for believing what they hear relentlessly, what they hear from the Deputy Prime Minister here, Nick Clegg, when he talks about the occupation as being at the root of the conflict. So I think this is really the main concern for Israel and the main reason why people can't see the truth. It's that endless barrage of misinformation. We're told over and over again that it's the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank that's responsible for the lack of peace. But if that were true, then it would follow that before 1967 there should have been peace. It would follow that after withdrawing from Gaza there would be peace, but that's not the case. But all we hear is over and over again this notion that it's the Jewish presence there that's at the heart of the conflict. And as long as that level of misinformation continues, I'm afraid, Israel really is fighting an uphill battle.
And that's why she needs her friends.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's so important that Christians who have a heart and a love for Israel stand with Israel and the Jewish people, because I believe we have a duty. And having done programs on the Holocaust, and you remember the horrors of what happened there and how suddenly someone, just living an ordinary life, carrying on as ordinary, all changes, all changes. Jewish people then sent to ghettos and then the gas chambers, just absolutely horrific. And this is when evil flourishes because a few good men decide to do nothing. Now's the time for action, surely.
Exactly. There's an obligation on the world, on every member of the international community, every state, not to take sides or, to back a perceived weaker side over an aggressor. There's an obligation on the world to stand with Israel, to stand with the country, which is a liberal democracy, a beacon of democracy in the region. There's an obligation on the world when other states preach genocide, preach the destruction of Israel, to stand up and to challenge that and not let it pass. There's an information as well on all of this. When we hear constant misinformation and slander towards Israel in the news, in the broad-stream political discourse, to stand up to it.
Alex, it's been a great pleasure to have you on this very special edition of the Middle East Report, so thank you. And I just want to thank you, our viewers, for watching this very, very important interview. And it's very important because we had Ayalon, the Deputy Israeli Foreign Minister, on this programme discussing the challenges facing Israel in 2012. And I believe it's our responsibility to ensure that we stand with Israel, we stand with the Jewish people, and we ensure that nothing like the Holocaust ever, ever, ever happens again to the Jewish people. And that's why we have to raise our voices, and that's why we need to make a stand for truth, for justice, and for peace.
גדולת ימינך תתיר רומה קבל רינה עמך סגרנו תערנו נורא בכוח גדולת ימינך תתיר רומה קבל רינת עמך סגרנו תערנו נא גיבור ראשי חונך כבבת שערי רחם דרך רחמי צדקתך